Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the TFTuesday Podcast. My name is Zil. It's great to have you all back here again for another wonderful episode in Season 4. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, K-Libra. How are you doing, K-Libra?
Doing okay. It's been a hot week, and I've been trying to make the most of it. How about you? You looking forward to the pool?
Yeah, it's funny. I hadn't gone to a pool in like 4 or 5 years before, like during all of COVID and everything was like way before that. And then we went at FE, and now we've started going again now. So it's been an interesting adjustment for me, but I do like it. Not when the water's too cold, though. Like, that'll just TF me into an icicle, and I'm not about that, so.
You just need the day to actually be hot. Keep going on cold, overcast day.
Yeah.
Not cold for summer. Cold for me. It's not supposed to be
see, it's the perfect temperature for me outside, but also, like, it's not the right temperature for pool, so,
Oh, it's not.
It's not.
You get out there and, like, actually freeze. Like, Anyway.
Anyways. We have a really exciting person with us today as our guest, but before we get to her, I just want to, of course, remind everyone that if you like what we do, you can support us on patreon.com/TFTuesdayPod. You've heard me do this spiel a million times, so I'll keep it brief. We appreciate everyone who comes on. We have a Discord server. The memes are very dank in our Discord server.
Sometimes get some nice art you won't see anywhere else if you're not already following us.
This is true. Sometimes you get exclusive art from myself or Libra, so you never know. Just saying, a little sprinkle in that little carrot. But TF Tuesday Pod on patreon.com. Also, I know Twitter is imploding right now. I haven't figured out what we're going to do about the social media stuff for
just keep
podcast,
using it until it's all fucked up.
I guess what I mean to say is we might pop up on like Mastodon or Blue Sky or something, and if it does, then whatever. But I haven't made any decisions.
I'm already going to be doing that. I'm going
Yeah.
to be helping until we get that settled.
We do love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, enough for our plugs. I'd like to turn it over to our very exciting guest here. So, Angela, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Angela Quinton. I am a werewolf fanatic. You might know me from the website I started in 2007, werewolfnews.com. You might know me from the collaborative sort of werewolf zine that turned into like an over 100,000 word long collaborative anthology called Werewolves Versus. You might know me from some of my fiction that I've started getting back into writing recently. Most recently, a short story involving a werewolf TF, no spoilers there, called They Say Don't Get Clocked. And yeah, just general like werewolf fanatic online for the last 20 years or so. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I guess, to start off with the werewolf in the room, I'm curious to know what initially kind of drew you to focus on werewolves overall.
I've liked werewolves for as long as I can remember. One of my first memories is seeing American Werewolf in London way before I was old enough to see any of that movie, both the parts that would be very boring to a 6-year-old and the parts that would be very confusing or scary. And it definitely made an impression on me. At that young age, I was mostly interested in werewolves, but any media that had a person turning into something else, especially some sort of creature or monster, was very exciting to me.
Yeah, me too. Just looking for that ever since the first time I saw any of those. I just kept looking for it. I was like, oh, Sci-Fi Network, surely they will have monsters and stuff like that do that stuff.
Yeah, I was born in 1981, so I grew up in the heyday of animators putting all kinds of weird transformation stuff into into whatever Saturday morning cartoon or like direct to VHS tape you could get from McDonald's or whatever. Mm-hmm. And also the 90s glut of like Tales from the Crypt and Outer Limits. There were all sorts of great opportunities to see people turning into cool stuff and to have those ideas and concepts burned into my impressionable young brain.
Yeah, there's so much
can relate.
So much good stuff from that era. I mean, obviously I have a bias as being a 90s kid too, a lot of the stuff that came in the 90s, but the 80s had some really good shit too. And I just think that like there's so much cool stuff from that era that I feel like especially some of the like newer folks to the scene haven't like necessarily been exposed to or heard of. And I would implore them to go like do a little bit of digging, because there are some real gems, especially from a practical effects perspective. If that is your thing, like there's so much cool stuff out there from that perspective.
Yeah.
Even just the concepts. Yeah. I wanted to add that it seemed like at that time there was definitely a more artistic slant to major media as well. So they would give really experimental stuff a chance way more often. Now you got to make sure that there's going to be some sort of return on investment, or it's already established by somebody else's work. It's a reference. It's an adaptation. But yeah, at that time, it's just like, hey, we have this idea for a movie. All right, maybe people want to see that.
Yeah. It's frustrating too. I feel like a lot of that is a byproduct of like, all these like movies and such have like these incredible ballooning budgets, primarily because of all the producers that are siphoning money off of them. And it's like, well, when your project is now a film that's $200 million, then yeah, of course they're not going to let you make many risks, and they're going to test everything.
Yeah. There's all sorts of things I saw in that era, the 80s and 90s, that are near and dear to my heart. But as the internet becomes more about an archaeological dig back into that era, as people sort of in our demographic and I would say age cohort start to reach back and dig things out, I'm being exposed to more and more things that I'd never heard of. There's presently just one other person who posts on werewolfnews.com, and he's actually kind of been the only person for the past while. I've been on an unofficial hiatus for a bit. Craig J. Clark, who's Hooded Werewolf on Twitter, for like, I think a decade now, has been running a column called Full Moon Features, where he'll review a different werewolf movie or werewolf-related movie in some depth. And his post earlier this month was about a film from 1988 called Cellar Dweller that is definitely some production company with a little bit of extra money saying, we need to put it into something. Let's get a practical creature effects guy to like write and direct a thing, and we'll just put it out direct to VHS.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to add that to our list. We have a little TF movie list. We'll have to add that.
Yeah.
I'm curious then. So, obviously you mentioned that as time has gone on, we've had to reach further and further back to find some of these like more like niche media treasures. Was there any like media in particular, though, like werewolf media, that really stuck with you? Like, not just, I mean, we've talked about American Werewolf in London, obviously, but like, are there any specific ones that really stuck in your head over the years?
There's two that's really come up. There's more than two, I guess. Mm-hmm. The Teen Wolf animated series. That was, growing up in Canada, in Western Canada, we got a much smaller cross-section of cartoons than our friends south of the border in Washington State got. But every now and then there would be some sort of cross-border network blip where suddenly for like one glorious morning we got different cartoons. So I saw maybe an episode and a half of the Teen Wolf animated series. And I had seen the Michael J. Fox movie already, but the idea that they would make a cartoon out of it with the same characters, and he's got a whole family of werewolves, including like I think a little sister who really wants to be one.
See one.
Or see one, but like nobody will bite her or nobody will turn her, like whatever. I can't remember what the conceit was, but I was like, oh, holy, I can't believe this is real. And then of course it just vanished. And it being, 1990 or whatever it is, there's no possible way for me to even verify that it existed. Maybe it was just a fever dream, but it's real. And like you can find it now through unofficial channels. And a friend furnished me with both seasons. So those are available for me to watch when I'm feeling nostalgic, but I kind of don't want to watch it because like a lot of media from that time, it's probably not as good as my like glimmering distant memories of it were. And I like the feeling of like sort of a faded Polaroid of that feeling I had being a little kid with already a well-entrenched interest in werewolves, seeing it on TV, like unexpectedly. Like I didn't have to go rent a movie and put it in or like, see it in the TV guide. It was just on.
Yeah, I get you. And I actually found, apparently the little sister's name is Lupe or Lupe, I don't know, but says desperately wants to be a werewolf. In one episode, she's able to transform because of magic, but since the spell turns anyone into a werewolf temporarily, she still does not know her true status. And like that's part of it. She wants to be one, but she's too young to know whether she actually is one yet or not. But she just wants it right now.
Which I mean, many of us can relate to. I mean, where's my werewolf transformation? I want it right now.
I think that's really cute.
Yeah. I think I mentioned earlier off mic that I've had mercury silver amalgam fillings for most of my adult life. And I just had those removed and replaced with composite fillings earlier this month. So there's a small part of me that still has a question mark over her head. Like, maybe now that I don't have that silver in me, maybe this upcoming full moon will be the one.
Well, fingers crossed.
Those new cramps you're feeling.
Yeah. Another werewolf on the screen that I saw that really imprinted on me was the Werewolf Concerto episode of, I can't remember if the show was called Tales from the Crypt or Tales from the Crypt Keeper. It was the live action spinoff of the comic series, in which Pierce Brosnan, Timothy Dalton, sorry, I was getting my Bonds mixed up.
Yeah.
Timothy Dalton plays a monster hunter with a secret. And that was partially another case of like prime time TV showing a werewolf, including like a pretty excellent, I would say, transformation scene. And something about the packaging of a werewolf character that wasn't like just shown for a second at the end of a 2-hour movie from the 1970s or something. A werewolf character that was also like one of the leading actors in the story. Yeah. That was really appealing to me because it was one of the first examples outside of werewolf movies in general where you could see a character like that and get to know them and try to get a sense of what the writers wanted you to think and feel about them, and then have a twist where like, oh, also it turns out that they're a werewolf. So how does that factor into how you're supposed to think and feel about them? Are you still supposed to identify with them or root for them, or are they suddenly like a bad character now?
That is a tough spot to be in. Watched a show recently that it gave me that same sort of feeling where I'm like, wow, I completely understand where you're coming from. I just don't know if this is what you need to be doing. I can't hate you. I really can't. You are doing some fucked up stuff, and I can't hate you. I fucking agree with you.
And it's funny too, because I feel like there's a bit of a, in my opinion, misconception that like, oh, you know, as we were in, or so arguably we're not in it anymore, but you know, in the golden age of television, you know, everything is like morally complex and it's this new thing. And it's like, there are so many shows back in the 80s and 90s and aughts that had morally complex characters. It's not a new thing to have them all over the place. Perhaps the volume is a bit higher now, but there are plenty of stories, I think, in older media where you do get a lot of that complexity. And I think that's just something that we always enjoy, especially, you know, when it crosses with one of our interests so nicely. So
yeah, that more drawn out amount of time that a lot of stories told at that time, especially in film and television, really appealed to me, and I think helped solidify my interest in werewolves. Because if you get whether it's a kid's cartoon or a movie or whatever, you have a character who is one of the main characters and they turn into something else, whether it's another monster or a werewolf. I always found the care taken to depict the transformation not just evocative because of what was on screen, but there's something very important to me, especially at a young age, about the fact that such care was being taken to show that happening. It wasn't just a poof transformation, unless it was a really low budget cartoon or something. Even in the 90s, the X-Men cartoon would show people, turning from a mutant into something else in a sort of drawn out manner. And that always implied to me that there was something more important or significant about the transformation than just the change of shape. And I'm always looking for that kind of, that feeling or that extra angle to the transformation in whatever media I consume.
I never thought about it that way, but yeah, I don't know why I never thought about it that way, but
it makes sense though. Now that you've said that, I'm thinking about it and I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. Because there's a value in seeing, there's a value in that change actually happening. It's not just, oh, now you're a different shape. That seems like obvious, but I hadn't thought of that.
There's the body horror angle of here's a person that you thought was just a normal, woman for 45 minutes, and now the moon is out and she's transforming. And we want the most of the audience, let's say the 99.5% of the audience who would be scared and terrified and repulsed by this, to feel her horror as she looks at her hands and looks at her feet and sees herself in the mirror and does all the tropes that we know and love from transformation reactions, especially in werewolf movies. But I just feel like there's more to it than just getting the horror response, because if you want that, you can imply a lot of that. A lot of movies nowadays seem to do that when they cut away or they show the transformation in silhouette. But a lot of people, a lot of Rick Bakers and Stan Winstons out there made a lot of money doing that kind of work and showing those sorts of transformations in very careful detail. And I gotta think it was for reasons more thoughtful than just, well, we need to scare the audience, so let's show them some latex and some yak hair for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me. And with some of these scenes, it can really make a mood. Sometimes it's not just horror. Sometimes maybe I got the impression that they want you to empathize with the character. Oh no, look at what they're going through. It's terrible. This is exactly what they are. This is what they're experiencing. You have a front row seat to that entire journey. And okay, like in Species, there's like a bunch of like transformation scenes and everything in that. But one example where it's like, yes, it's supposed to be scary because she's a little girl at the time, and she's just in a train car, and you see her body starting to do weird things, and she has no idea what's going on. But you feel bad for her because she doesn't know what's happening, and she's like, her body just has dominion over her. It doesn't matter what she wants or how scared she is. Mm-hmm. And, yes, it's scary, but also it's just like, oh no, poor thing. And even in like, I think I brought up Blood and Chocolate recently, and I don't like that story anymore for a bunch of reasons. But the one part that really stuck with me was the transformation of the main character, who is also a lady. She had a boyfriend or something, and she was like, I really love this guy. Let me, I'm going to invite him into the real me, like all of me, right? So he watches her change, and he's terrified, but this is something that she's accustomed to. And after she's done changing, he's freaked the fuck out. And what he ends up doing is just like shrinking away from her. And she's like, okay, I got to convince him that I'm still me. And, she puts her head down and she tries to use like all like the submissive body language. Like, I'm not going to hurt you. It's still me, but he still won't get it. And I really like that scene because it's pretty sad. And I feel bad for her that this is a part of her life and she tried to bring somebody else into it. And it wasn't necessarily like, oh, look, her changes are scary, but like, this is a fact of life for her, and she can't find people to accept her.
Yeah. That's hard when there's something important about you that is maybe secret or something you don't share with everybody, and you choose to share it with someone who you're close with, and it's not a great response.
Yeah. I feel like there's so many analogies that can be drawn to that. I mean, werewolves are rich for use in analogies. We've seen it many times over history. And I was curious to ask, obviously they have a rich history within humanity's history, and they frequently appear in things like legends and mythology. So I was wondering if those historical roots have affected your impression of werewolves at all.
They have, largely through being examples of things that I don't like or that I'm not interested in. A lot of the books that were accessible to me in school libraries when I was younger were very dry or very simplistic, and they touched on the same handful of like medieval myths, and you get into things that are a bit more analytical, more at the college university level, and they're still really heavily leaning on things like witch hunts and persecution of anybody who didn't fit within the cultural norms of the time in Europe. And the general consensus was that, seems to be, at least from like the available history, is that werewolves are metaphors for things that are dirty and bad or wrong. They're, a stand-in for fallen man or for the dangers of nature and all the things that we as, quote unquote, humankind want to avoid or have control over. And it was formative to me to read those accounts of things and kind of have the same response that I did seeing somebody in a TV show turning into a monster, like feeling like I'm expected to feel a certain way about this. And I can tell that a lot of my peers do feel the way that they're expected to about this. I mean, somebody wrote a book about it, but I don't really feel the same way. And I don't know if it's because I don't understand what's being presented to me or because I do, and I just don't agree with it, or I have a different
Right.
interpretation or analysis. So I recognize that there is an enormous volume of history all over the world related to shapeshifters and lycanthropes and therianthropes in general. But having done enough research and having had people who've done way more research than me share their sort of impressions and findings with me, it really is, I think, an example of knowing what I don't like and kind of shying away from a lot of that, because it's not as affirming or as exciting or as, what's the word? Gratifying isn't the word. It's very closed off. It feels very dead. It feels very focused on perpetuating a very narrow range of perspectives and agendas, and it's not interesting to me.
Yeah.
Well, if you could take it at this angle, assuming that maybe you do any more digging in the future, I think of it as kind of like an anthropological thing too. We're like, wow, look at how people were, looking at these aspects of, behavior or nature. And I think that's a good opportunity to be able to turn it on its head. I see old things like that. I'm like, wow, look at this. This was terrifying. And they sucked so much and they wanted to excise them. I'm like, but what if not? I like all this stuff.
Yeah. It's definitely a realm that I appreciate the knowledge that I have, and I'm very, very grateful for the people I've encountered, especially the people who, they'll write their dissertation on, the history of werewolves in film or the history of werewolves in a given country, and then they'll just send me a copy. And, it's wild. And I'm really flattered to get stuff like that. And then to read it, I'm like, oh, wait, yeah, I definitely did not go to university. I like what this is and I can appreciate it intellectually, but there are assertions being made here that I'm not smart enough to agree with or disagree with. But it definitely contributes to a background sense of, well, there's some stories that were told here that have been baked into a lot of modern culture and its handling of anybody who's other or different. And knowing those things and knowing the negative impact that they've had on people, I'm better equipped to subvert that sort of thing in my own creative work and in the things that I choose to elevate. Because that's a lot of what the Werewolf News website was originally for, was just finding werewolf stuff that I personally liked and then trying to show it to people and spread it around.
I will say I heavily connect on that point in particular. I mean, a big part of what brought about this podcast in the first place as well was, wanting to elevate different perspectives and different folks who had backgrounds in things that maybe people weren't familiar with, and we wanted to give them a broader reach. So it sounds like kind of a similar thought process there. And I think it's really interesting and unique to have that kind of a platform like you do with Werewolf News to be elevating those kinds of depictions of werewolves in a way that resonates with you, and maybe others haven't seen that before, so you have a platform to kind of share that and hear, I guess, some sort of feedback as well, I imagine.
Yes, yeah, it's been interesting to see the audience shift a little bit over the last 7 or 8 years. I knew I was trans way before I started Werewolf News, but I didn't come out until like 2011, I think. And when I did that, I started to be a little less cagey about not just sharing queer werewolf media, but actually like championing it and talking about how it related to me or how it affected me as a trans woman. And the shift in the audience was amazing. It wasn't, I was expecting to get some heat from hardcore horror fans who don't, who quote unquote don't want politics in their movies or their media or whatever.
Yeah.
I didn't get any of that. And I'm going to knock on wood because you never know, that tidal wave may be coming. But it was much more a case of other people in similar situations, especially people who are queer or who have identities that they feel like they can't fully inhabit where they're at the time, like reaching out to me and being just excited that they had a venue where they could see things they were interested in and have those things shared by somebody whose values and perspectives were a little closer to theirs.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about the idea that you did not get backlash for coming out. And then it made me realize that I think that if you want to truly appreciate horror, you got to be able to empathize with people in the first place. How do you know what's terrifying if you don't know what really hurts people? That's part of like horror. The things you don't want, the things that make you feel like you don't want to be here anymore. if you don't really care about someone else, do you really know what horror is?
I think that's a great perspective. I feel really safe in that community. I'm not fully in it any more than I would consider myself to be fully in like the Darien community or the furry community. I'm sort of adjacent to a lot of these places, but I've never received anything but good vibes from people in the horror community.
I just want to say that if for any reason you start to get shit, and if you need backup, we'll totally fucking back you up. There's no reason to
absolutely
let that shit fly.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But I also want to piggyback a little bit on the adjacent thing, because I feel like that's such a common feeling in a lot of folks in like the transformation space, even sometimes to the transformation space itself, you know, that feeling of like, you know, I don't quite fit in. Like, yes, these are kind of my people, but, you know, there's a sense of like, you almost have to find your own niche within that niche sometimes. But to your point, the fact that you have had good experiences, I think, is a very positive sign. And to what Libra said earlier, I do think that, you know, for most people, to know horror, you do have to be able to empathize. And if you can't do that, you don't really have a proper grasp on the genre in itself.
Yeah, I agree.
And I also agree with Zil. It's hard because it's okay. Zil has like furry, so it's very easy to go for I'm cool here and I'm cool there, and yes, it makes total sense that I would want to turn into these things, including my Sona, which is cool.
I'm just very cool.
And then you got werewolves, and then Angela has werewolves, so she can just be like, oh yeah, you know, I love monsters and I like people turning into monsters, but I'm comfortable right here. I'm just like, I like people turning into stuff. I don't know what that means. People think I'm a furry sometimes. I'm not.
I love that though. I love occupying a space that is not really quite definitely one thing or another. I think there's a lot of value to that sort of questing or searching. I mean, I knew I liked werewolves when I was young, and then when I grew up and had access to the internet in the mid 90s, the easiest source of werewolf media was actually like furry media. You know, things like you know, VCL and Fur Nation, and you know, 90s kids turn up.
Yeah.
And so I started to think, well, is that me? Is this my community? Because I'm seeing a lot of art depicting people who are more animal than people, but they're still people. And do I relate to that? Is that giving me the same feeling as, you know, seeing American Werewolf in London? And it didn't really, but it was still close enough to, it was closer than anything else that I had access to at the time. And then, you know, I grew up a little bit more and started having questions about spirituality and then gender. And there are all kinds of communities out there online that really want to talk to you about those things. And then some of them want to recruit you, I would say, into
oh my God, yeah.
a given mindset or a given canonical point of view about those things. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't mean it to sound as malevolent as that, although there are some really, you know, shitty cases of that happening.
Well, no, but I wouldn't think that's not necessarily like a bad slant to take. People want more. People, like, you have a bunch of fans that you can find who will say, I want TF to be more mainstream. No, they want more. And they would love to be able to relate with more people. The more people that they can surround themselves with who can relate to them, they are going to feel safer and they're going to feel accepted, because acceptance, all of us have really like searched for that, you know, probably still looking for it in some other ways. And I'd like to assume that at this point we found enough to feel secure with ourselves. But yeah, it feels good to have more people. So it's just like, oh yeah, come, be interested. Be like me. Check out this thing. Maybe you'll think it's cool too. Because if you do, then I got another friend who's into this. And that feels great. Mm-hmm. So it's not even like a strange thing to say that people would want more to be in there. Like, oh yes, they definitely want more people. People want communities to grow. People want like-mindedness. Yeah, and that's not really weird to even put out there.
Oh yeah.
If you know, you talk recruitment is something that implies an active search, and that's not really a lot of people. I guess there are some. There are some.
Yeah.
There are some.
I just want to add on to that and say that I agree. I think it's kind of a natural thing that so many people do, not even really necessarily thinking about it. It's not necessarily a malevolent thing, but it also is something that sometimes can be a little bit jarring. You know, like if you're looking for a community and you find something that you see like shades of yourself in, but then there's like almost an active push to be like, so this is how you should be now. Like, you know, all the other stuff that deviates, throw away that, just take the stuff that does resonate and make that your whole personality. That is the thing that can be a little bit jarring sometimes. And again, it's not necessarily malicious, although sometimes it is. But even in those cases where it's not malicious, it can be jarring for an individual, because at the end of the day, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, Angela, I feel like the most interesting things in communities happen on the margins of those communities.
Oh,
so
I fully agree with you. Yeah. I mean, I thought I was a furry for a while, and I'm not, but I'm still very close friends with a lot of furries. I mean, you can't run a site or a Twitter account or whatever like Werewolf News without seeing a ton of stuff from furry artists, from indie and mainstream horror people, from authors, from academics. And I've dipped my toes into a lot of those different communities and never really fully invested myself or my identity in any of them. Because I figured out pretty quickly through furry and a few other communities that I really did try to make like my whole deal, that even if I did feel very at home or welcomed, or if I felt very aligned with a lot of what made that community what it was, to limit myself to just that community was to shut out a lot of other things about myself that didn't fit. And so by definition, I sort of straddle a variety of different communities, and I think they're all great. And I feel really lucky to be able to know and hang out with such a diverse range of people.
I want to touch a little bit more on Werewolf News, but before we get to that, I do want to ask, you know, obviously there's a variety of different diverse perspectives, especially more recently when it comes to werewolves. And so I wanted to ask for you, what is your favorite or ideal kind of werewolf portrayal, both from like a physical and a metaphorical perspective?
I like body horror. I like elements of empowerment that comes with trade-offs. So, I mean, I specifically have aesthetics I definitely have, I prefer plantigrade to digitigrade. You know, I get yelled at so much for being kind of deliberately provocative about how I prefer my werewolves without tails.
Fuck that
all that. I mean, that to me, that's like Coke versus Pepsi, or like what toppings go on a pizza. It's like, if you get really, really serious about that, then maybe you need to reevaluate what your priorities are. But everybody's allowed to have preferences. I have aesthetics that I like, and I'm extremely grateful that I'm married to an artist who knows exactly what those aesthetics are and draws them for me frequently. So the kinds of portrayals that I tend to enjoy have more to do with the story that's being told and the character, and how lycanthropy is used to say something about that character or their situation that you couldn't say otherwise. And increasingly, again, this is kind of the same way that I look at werewolf history. I'm increasingly more interested in any werewolf story that is not put together by a white cishet guy. If it's any queer perspective, any werewolf media that's created by a person of color, like that to me is much more exciting to see or read or experience than the same 5 or 6 different kinds of stories that have been shown to varying degrees of effectiveness and interest over the last 30 or 40 years. There are a lot of easy metaphors that you could reach for with werewolves, and some of them associating the first change with somebody's first menstruation. Great, Ginger Snaps did that perfectly, knocked it out of the park. I don't know if we necessarily need to revisit that particular approach anytime soon, because it was done so well. Mm-hmm. And if somebody was to redo that, God forbid they make a remake of Ginger Snaps. Oh my God.
Oh God.
What a cursed idea. But if somebody was to do something like that and just put an even cooler looking werewolf in it, I don't think I would like that as much as something that had a lower budget and maybe a werewolf suit that I've seen before, enough times that I can pinpoint exactly who made it, but that tells an interesting story with it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I want to say as well, I think if anyone is out there thinking, I'm going to do a remake of Ginger Snaps, first of all, please don't. But second of all, I feel like so much of the story of Ginger Snaps is also really tied to the time and place that it was made in. And you lose that if you're doing like just like a carte blanche remake with maybe better effects. So I completely agree there. Also, fun fact, the Ginger Snaps High School was right next to where I grew up. So that's my little fun fact of the day.
That is a fun fact.
Yeah, this guy was pointing out what school it was and also the greenhouse that the other guy was working at, who I forget his name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also so next door to where I grew up.
Okay, that rules.
Yeah, so we've been trying to find out like when it is we'd like to go, to just be like, yeah, there it is, cool.
Yeah,
make the pilgrimage.
Yeah, this is the one of the benefits of living in Toronto. It's like so much media has been filmed here to, save money and cut costs and, cash in on tax credits. And so there's all these recognizable landmarks that I grew up around that at the time I didn't really think much of. And then as I got older, I was like, wait, it's actually very unique to have all of these things around me, all this, cultural cachet of transformation media in particular, I'll say, like, Animorphs was filmed here. And anyways.
Yeah. We go to the mall. We go to the mall where Animorphs was filmed
all the time,
fairly regularly.
Very similar experience growing up in and around Vancouver.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Which never ever plays itself in film or television, but is used constantly, and especially during the last decade or so, because we moved away from there in 2019. When I would hear that they were getting ready to film something that I knew definitely had a werewolf in it, it would just drive me nuts to know that I'm sitting at work in an office building downtown where I can look out the window and actually see like active film sets and know that somewhere within my like line of sight, even though it could be, 5 miles away, there's a warehouse with a bunch of werewolf suits in it.
Yeah.
Or there's somebody somewhere that is getting ready to have like practical effects put on them, and it's there somewhere, but I can't get to it.
Yeah. It is so unnerving. Oh my gosh. I will say though, and to echo what Libra said, everyone should be entitled to have their own opinions on what they think the ideal werewolf physiology is. I know there's a lot of teeth gnashing. I mean, I personally love my tails, but I respect those who prefer them without.
Don't be a shit about it. If you have to assert, no, you're not doing it right, go away.
Yeah.
Go the fuck away, man.
Yeah, chill out.
I like what I like because I know what I want to see, but the fact that you like flat-footed werewolves, I'm just like, oh, okay, that's different. That's very much not a thing I run into. Usually, I like those beastly features because I like beastly features. I think they're attractive, and also it means more stuff changing because that's what I want to see. Doesn't fucking bother me. Shouldn't really bother anybody like that. I've known a few people like that.
Yeah. There are some rules lawyers out there. The one time that I was invited to a now defunct werewolf convention in South Washington, just outside Portland, a couple of years ago, and I gave a talk on werewolf aesthetics. And the gist of it was basically like, listen, everybody, have your aesthetic preferences that could be really near and dear to your heart, but like be cool about it, because part of the joy of werewolves and transformation in general is that it could be anything. You can introduce whatever kinds of features you want within reason. I would like there are artists out there that I see who are like, oh, check out my werewolf OC, and it's a werewolf but that has like antlers or non-lupine, non-human features, and I'm like, okay, that's not really my thing, and I wouldn't call that a werewolf, but I'm not going to make anybody's day better by like saying that to you. So
no need to crusade for it. You're not standing up for anything. Your expertise in the matter is fucking fake, okay?
Yeah.
It's fucking fake. I know what I like. If you know what you're talking about with what you like, that's one thing. But do not come bring your rules and bullshit.
Yeah.
You literally said, oh, it can be anything. Like, yeah, it can be anything. And some people are like, oh, poof, TF, oh my god. like, holy shit. Like it's fine. Yeah. Oh, but don't you get like bitterly disappointed? No? What the fuck, man?
I will just say that, as Twitter enters its death spiral, I hope that we can leave some of those habits with Twitter as it, sinks to the bottom of the ocean floor. And shitting on things we don't like, I think should be one of those habits that we give up, because it doesn't lead to anything good.
I fully agree. I tried to leave that mindset behind with Werewolf News around the time that The Howling Reborn was being filmed, because somebody leaked some blurry cell phone photos from the set of what some of the practical werewolf suit stuff looked like. And I posted it, and I think I wrote a pretty snarky sort of like, you know, I was talking down on it pretty hard.
Yeah.
And maybe 3 or 4 days went by, and I got a very polite email from Adrian Moreau, who was the creature effects, practical effects guy who, I mean, the guy's won Academy Awards by this point.
Yeah.
He's like, hey, you know, me and my team did that, and I just wanted to tell you that that's not at all what we had intended to do. We're so sorry. Like, I won't tell tales out of school, but he was very cool about the fact that I was dunking on their work. And he said, we had a much different vision, but there were time and budget constraints, and there was some input from the people who hired us that we just couldn't ignore. So, you know, I would love to share with you some more of our werewolf stuff that we're excited about, that is exactly what we wanted it to look like, which is really cool.
That is so lucky. That is such a lucky time. It's a great way to be like, I don't want to do this anymore, but this one time it worked out.
Well,
one time. It's great. It's great when somebody happens to line up and be like, man, I don't know what happened here, but this really could have been better, man. And it's like, yeah, I know, I agree. Here's why it sucks.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you like everything else I've done, because that's the stuff I cared more about.
Yes, I'm very grateful that he was so gracious, and we had some cool email exchanges. And my main takeaway from that, other than the fact that he's got an incredibly good taste when it comes to werewolf aesthetics, is, you know, if you're posting something on the internet, especially that is intended to have a readership, creative people can see the things that you say about what they make. And if you want to cultivate and maintain good relationships with people, and have people share their work with you and be excited and feel safe to do it, be circumspect about how shitty you are about stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I imagine, you know, like we've talked a little bit already about, I think, how, you know, you started Werewolf News back in 2007 to kind of bring your own perspective. I'm curious, you know, obviously the internet has changed a lot from what it was like in the late aughts to now, for better or worse. And so I was curious, you know, obviously there's been an element of like almost collecting and preserving of werewolf media. And I'm wondering how that's changed over time for you, like with your process.
It's changed my process in that I got very overwhelmed, and that has contributed to a lot of the sort of unofficial and unintentional hiatuses that I've taken from the site. As the ubiquity of that sort of captured and archived material started to make it more available to be shared and commented on. And as more and more people started to publish the things that they were making themselves online, the sheer volume of stuff that there was to share and talk about kind of grew to the point where I had to say, well, I can post on Werewolf News, or I can do the work that like pays for my bills and you know, gives me a salary. And for the longest time, it was possible to do both. I was lucky that I had a job where I could also sort of post off the side of my desk on Werewolf News, and I had an hour-long train ride at the start and the end of each day where there was nothing for me to do except sleep or write a post and then hit submit as soon as I got home.
That is a good time to cultivate either like a true interest or just indulge a curiosity.
Fully. As time went on, I posted less and less because I take things too seriously, I think. And looking back at it now, I think it was a net positive because there are plenty of other people who've sort of filled in the niches that felt particularly overwhelming to me. Most recently, a friend of mine, Dobes Crusher, who's an incredible artist, and he's published a really great werewolf anthology called Werewolves.gay. He just finished compiling, I think, what is probably the most authoritative collection of practical werewolf effects from all film and television, like ever, like screenshots and like here's what movie it's from and like all the details. Like that's a passion project. That's a labor of love. That's the sort of thing I would love to be able to dedicate my time to, especially because that media has become available. People rip it off VHS tapes that are lost forever because of some licensing deal that'll never be released by Scream Factory, but somebody recorded it on TV 30 years ago and they have it. that's incredible that stuff exists. And I thank the internet and the people on it for making that stuff available.
Mm-hmm.
I've had to learn to let go of the sense that I need to be in control of that fire hose, or at least have one hand on it at all times, because it's just too much. There's too much stuff out there, and too much of it is good at this point.
It can be so overwhelming. Like you said, like I feel like every day someone's discovering something new, and it's like to keep up with all of that on top of all the other things you have going on in your life. I mean, it's an impossible task for any like group of people, let alone one person, right? So
I've contributed to my own hardship in that sense by starting Werewolves Versus, which does take up a lot of time and which did have a finite point planned. And that point has come up this summer when we put out the last issue. And I was about to call it a mistake. I didn't make a mistake, but I accidentally fell into running as part of my effort to feel better in my body and as part of my transition. And again, because of the way my brain is wired, it wasn't just, I'll run in 5K and that'll be it. I needed to run further and further distances. And I'm now at the point where I'm like training for ultra marathons where you're running like 30, 40 or 50 miles. And the time that it takes to train for those eats up a lot of time that I could spend doing just about anything else. So I've accidentally filled up my schedule for the past couple of years, and I'm planning to make some changes to that in the coming months. But for now, I just need to hang on.
Yeah.
I can relate to you trying to balance wanting to be more fit and also like I want to make more art. I want to play more games. I want to go and, see more places. And I don't know, at times it could be discouraging. Even, I don't know if you ever felt that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like, I could be doing this like these people, but I'm not. And with like the labor of love of, putting together all the information and getting all these resources for all the werewolf media and stuff. But it is good, and I say this for myself and anybody else listening, you have to realize that some of these people who are probably, have impressive collections or have accumulated a great amount of skill in a particular thing have dedicated their time, so much of their time. It's actually a lot of sacrifices that if you put it into perspective, you got to ask yourself if you're really willing to do that. Because if you're not, it's not terrible that you don't make that decision for the sacrifices. It's just what you are doing, how you're spending your time. If you're enjoying that, if that's meaningful to you, then you're doing okay. And if you're still doing this stuff at a reduced capacity, whatever that means, then you're doing fine. Because I would love to be a better artist. I would love to be in better shape like I was back when I was, training for wrestling at Gleason's gym. But my life is different now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's also funny because sometimes, like you said, you kind of fell into running. In some ways, I fell into doing a weekly podcast. But anyways, everyone fills up their schedules in their own ways. And I think that it can be challenging because, like you said, Libra, like it can detract in some ways from the other things that you want to do. But it's also good to remind ourselves that, like, we all only have like so much time in our lives and in the day. And if you don't get to something now, a window could open up later, be it, near in the future or further out. It doesn't mean that the door is closed. So,
but there are no regrets in doing this either.
Oh, no, I'm not. Sorry. Let me be clear. I'm not like bemoaning it. I enjoy what I do.
I'm trying to assert that for all the things you're not doing, there is far less regret in choosing to do a thing for any stretch of time.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked enough shit about it. You remember those days at the bar?
Yes.
We did it for like 3 nights straight almost. It'd be like, man, we could be doing this shit. And they're like, all right, now we're doing it. It's been good.
Yeah, it's been good.
Yeah. I will say a side effect of less of the curation and presenting of other people's work is that it allows me to enjoy it more, to do something like watch an episode from the latest season of Black Mirror and like enjoy it for what it is, because it might have some good TF stuff in it that actually is something I can't stop thinking about, because there's a lot about that particular episode that hit really close to home for me. And I don't have to fucking write a post about it. I don't have to like frame it in a way that is going to go up in front of, readers and be like an objective assessment of the episode without spoiling anything. I can just watch the
Thank
thing
you.
and enjoy it and have my feelings about it and talk to my friends
Thank you
and
for
my
that.
family about it.
Oh my God, thank you for that. The one thing that isn't really mentioned when people want to recommend something to somebody is be like, this is the one where this happens and the things that happen here are really messed up. Like, just let people watch it and feel if they think the same thing. That's all.
Yeah. Especially to be circumspect, especially for that episode. The episode doesn't work as well if you know in advance. It can still work, but I watched it completely blind, and oh my God, it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was just over the moon. So
I was
anyways,
so bitter that I recognized the scene. I'm like, wait, this is the spot where somebody just posted it. God fucking damn it. But then the rest of it was really good, and it makes me upset. It's one of these few pieces of media. I'm like, wow, they did that really good, and people are like, we think that's like the weakest episode. Like,
I know,
fuck
people,
you, man.
People can be wrong. It's fine. But to key in on the media thing, because we've been talking about it, and obviously it's related to werewolf news. I know you've obviously been doing less curation, so to speak, and more just enjoyment. So with that time and enjoyment, I imagine you've kind of like been able to think a little bit about trends and such, and I'm curious if there's like any sort of trends you've seen in like the tone and focus of werewolf media over time, and if there's been any trends in particular that you feel have been conducive towards spreading the love of werewolves around. I
don't have like a single sentence sort of summary of how I feel about it, but it feels as though the approach to werewolves, especially in popular media, is becoming more complicated and more forgiving. When I started Werewolf News, it was the peak of Twilight and True Blood, and there was a very particular way that werewolves were represented in popular media that was not at all interesting or appealing to me. And there was that, and then there was people that could remember the B and C tier movies of the 90s and early 2000s, and that was all you could do with werewolves. They could be slightly taboo romance interests with like a tragic backstory and an affliction, or they could be a cartoonish bad guy for somebody to shoot in the third act. And the trend now seems to be more interested in telling stories of people who are werewolves, who have families and who live with it and who don't treat it as though it's just an annoyance they have to deal with once every 26 to 28 days. It's an actual thing that they struggle with, even if they don't regard it as a curse. But there's a lot more nuance and exploration of metaphors around addiction, gender identity, aging, all kinds of things that you could have lycanthropy sort of stand in as a metaphor for without really relying heavily on the really easy and fun to reach for buttons of horror and gore.
But I will say I agree on the trend front. I think that there's been a lot more of an expansion in the stories that can be told with them. Like, it's no longer restricted to, the same 4 or 5 things. Like, we have a multitude of media that examines it from different lenses and uses it as different sorts of allegories to different societal issues that I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, one, not werewolf, but I think Nimona does that pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
oh
absolutely.
Gosh. Yeah,
that was a hit in our house for sure.
So good.
Yeah, the movie got me all teary-eyed. And because I'm here and I got to do it at least once an episode, I was like, oh, that's Berserk too. The main character is a guy who looks like a bad guy, who has like a rougher look, and he's missing an arm, and his opponent, for better or worse, is somebody who he really cared about, but looks like practically angelic and wonderful and beautiful, and everybody loves him, and it's just Berserk.
I will say something that I really appreciated about that movie, without like giving anything away. The ending is different from the graphic novel and the webcomic that it was based on. And I think that's partially because of the time. Like, the webcomic / graphic novel came out in 2014. We're in a very different climate now in 2023. And I'm frankly very glad that they changed it, because I think that it made the piece that much more resonant for the current time. And I would still encourage people to go read the webcomic, because its ending there is also brilliant in my opinion. But I will just say I'm very thankful that they changed it for the now movie, because I feel like thematically it landed so much better that way. So
yeah, it's worth reading source material for stuff because it can come drastically different. And I mentioned Berserk, but even like the Max. Anybody ever heard of or remember the Max?
Yeah, I remember that. I remember reading that comic, and then they made a film out of it.
They made a MTV animated series, and that series ended so differently. And I remember that I found the comic and thought, let me just read this. I never read it. And that comic went to so many places the show never went to and probably would not have been allowed to go to either.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, definitely check source material for stuff. And adaptation sometimes is super close one-to-one, but, like, even then, you know?
Yeah.
Just, like, go to the thing. You might actually... Here's one more thing I'll say about adaptations and stuff like that. You know, Watchmen, the movie, you can talk about whether you like it or not, but I think the movie is a good complement to the source material. I say read the source material, but the movie is still worth watching and enjoying if you like the source.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take on that sort of stuff.
So I want to make sure we don't get this lost in the mix. Obviously, you mentioned Werewolf Versus, which is the written anthology that you've been running. And I know you mentioned that it's always had a set ending. So that already kind of answered one of my original questions. But I was curious to hear a little bit more about the project itself, given that it kind of like pits werewolves against a different physical, cultural, or ideological foe in each issue. So I was wondering, is that like a reaction to some of the trends you've seen in media over time, or like what was the genesis for that?
When I came up with the idea, it was mostly because I wanted to see, I wanted to create or help foster the creation of media that's and stories that I wanted to see but wasn't seeing. And I was inspired by some of my contemporaries on Twitter at the time who were putting out zines, real, like literal, like black and white photocopied zines, you know, like that level of fidelity. And I had learned from past experience that if I am going to do something ambitious that is a medium to long-term project, it's much healthier for me if I set some parameters and set a definite endpoint. And I honestly don't remember where I came up with the idea for Werewolves Versus anything. I don't remember what the genesis of that mechanism was, but I knew that I wanted it to be 10 issues long as a series, and I wanted to combine werewolves with something unexpected that would result in interesting juxtapositions or an opportunity for somebody to write a story or draw a picture or come up with a comic that was like pure fan service for themselves. You know, one of the earlier issues was Werewolves Versus Space. And I'll bet you, I know for a fact because I put the issue out and there were way more submissions than I could possibly fit in the issue. I suspected that there were people out there that wanted to tell science fiction stories that involved werewolves because you're in space and there's other moons and there's, you know, all sorts of you know, great opportunities to do something really schlocky. And there were. And if you don't create a venue for that kind of story to be told or showcased, then, you know, you just have to hope that somebody puts out a call for submissions to some other, maybe more highbrow or serious type publication and hope that you get selected. So I deliberately, my wife and I came up with a list of maybe 20 or 30 different potential themes that we could pull from. And every time an issue went out, I'd hit submit to send out the email to let people know it's available or to publish it on whatever site it was being published on. At first it was Gumroad and now it's on Itch. And the next thing I would do is go to the text file and be like, okay, like what's next? Like what's the next issue going to be? Because we have a dwindling list here. And based on the sort of arc and tenor and variety that we've already put out, what makes the most sense to do next? Yeah. And I've noticed that they're getting a little more, I mean, they did get more serious as time went on. It started off with, you know, the 1990s, like Werewolves Versus an Era and Time, up to, you know, Werewolves Versus Nature and Suburbia and things like that are a little more, it's a little easier to make the connection between a werewolf story and that particular setting. But I liked keeping the mechanism of verses in there, you know, werewolves in opposition to something or in conflict with something without specifying that it needed to be like a literal physical conflict. It could just, as long as the theme is present in the work somewhere, then I consider that sufficient to consider the submission for inclusion. Yeah.
Did you ever have like a favorite topic that you got to explore in these anthologies?
For me, it's a tie between the goofiness of Werewolves Versus the Circus, which has some really serious stuff in it, but also just a lot of really fun concepts. And I mean, this is maybe sounds like too prepackaged of an answer, but the final issue, which I'm working on right now, is Werewolves Versus Everything. And it was initially going to be called Werewolves Versus the Apocalypse, because I wanted it to be a very calamitous sort of, let's just throw everything together and just make it a real like Doom 2016, like Rob Zombie song type, like just anything goes. But Werewolves Versus the Apocalypse runs into some namespace collisions with other werewolf franchises out there. So I switched it to Everything. And I say this with every issue that comes out. I think this one might be my favorite of the ones we've put out, because there are some stories and some art and comics in this one that made me like stand up and like yell and triumph because they were so good or so metal or so goofy or so like right in the wheelhouse of what I love about werewolves and the idea of being one and exploring what that means. And there's always at least one submission for an issue that makes me cry when I read it. And there were a few in this issue that did that to me. So
that's amazing.
I mean, they're all fantastic. I'm incredibly proud of everyone who's submitted to something to any of them, whether they made it in or not. But yes, a circus is good if you want something goofy, and Everything, which will hopefully be coming out next month. I'm pleased that I'm concluding that project with a real bang.
Yeah.
Sweet. And even better that you keep saying over and over, I think this is the best one yet, means that you've got a pretty good track record of really feeling what you're creating and enabling to create.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. The first few issues that I put out, I had to go around asking people if they would contribute something. I had to go out and solicit submissions. And I always capped the entries at 15 per issue, although Werewolves Versus Fashion has 30 because there were so many entries that were just images, like really great images, some good fits in that one. But it's essentially just me, like making the selection, editing the stories, assembling the thing in InDesign or Affinity Publisher, marketing it, doing all that stuff. So capping it at 15 is sort of an escape valve for getting overcommitted to things. But as time went on, it became less about like, oh Jesus, am I going to have enough to fill this issue? And became more about like, oh my God, like this isn't just like friends of mine from online that are deigning to write a 3,000 word short story that I'm going to publish. Like there are published authors, like people who make a living writing, submitting stuff to this. There are people who are good enough authors, in my estimation, to be making a living selling hardcover novels in bookstores who've never been published anywhere except Werewolves Versus. And it's been a real trip to deliberately take an increasing backseat in the project. Like I'm still the person who puts it together and puts it out, but again, my love of curating and showcasing the things that I love about werewolves is perfectly encapsulated in this project, because what makes every issue great is the work that other people do and then submit it. So you have because you have that love for it, it shows to the other people. No matter how prestigious you might be, I think that at heart, if you're just a creative person and you find an opportunity to do something fun, you're going to want to do that. And if you feel like you got somebody who is genuine and sincere about what they're doing, they'll probably want to get involved with that. And that way it's good for people to know that I think it's good to look at anybody that maybe you look up to and not kind of put them like on so high a pedestal where it's like, oh, you should not touch, you should not approach, because like humanize these people some more.
Oh yeah. I mean, or anthropomorphize them as a werewolf. I mean,
I was going to say,
which is to make more like a person anyway.
Yeah,
it all loops back.
There you go. Now, I know we've spent a lot of time talking about your curation. I think it's time to talk a little bit about your own creation, because you are, of course, also a writer. And I'm curious to know a little more about what got you into writing in the first place, and also like how you would describe why you write what you write, like what experiences you had that contributed to that.
I started in the same way that I saw American Werewolf in London and The Howling at way too young an age. I was reading Stephen King novels at way too young an age. And I loved the way that reading made me feel, not just, Stephen King 1980s cocaine-fueled horror, but also, my dad read to me when I was a little kid, and read Watership Down and Robinson Crusoe and all kinds of books to me. So the idea of feeling something really deeply because of words that somebody wrote or the way that they chose to phrase something, that's always really appealed to me. I can't quite put my finger on why, other than knowing, I think from a young age, even before I was able to put it into these words, that there's a lot about my body and my perception of where I fit in the world that just doesn't feel correct. It doesn't feel good. And some of that has to do with gender, and some of it has to do with species, I guess. And increasingly, writing has become an obvious sort of escape hatch for those feelings, or a method of exploring and attaining things that are prohibitively difficult or impossible to obtain in the quote unquote, real world.
No, I think that's a really good way to put it, almost the escape hatch kind of metaphor there. I feel like so much of our creative outputs are kind of like expressions of things that we don't have a place to put them otherwise. And so you can put things in the art or the writing or what have you, and then it can simmer a little bit. And okay, now the pressure's come a little bit down in the pressure cooker, and you can go in there and go into this little escape pod, so to speak, to mix my metaphors, and actually like sift through it and be like, okay, this is what I want to keep, or this is like what I want to more explore. But I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about of having that like escape hatch for all the like creative energy or other energy and what have you, like to have a place to put it and to let those ideas simmer.
Yeah. Another component that's important to me that I really absorbed from two of my favorite authors, Douglas Copeland and Kim Stanley Robinson, is the fact that you can write a story or a novel and essentially just make it a love letter to a thing or a place that is important to you. Obviously, you need to put a narrative in there, but the joy of writing it and reading it can really come from just reading somebody expressing with eloquence the way that they feel about a place or a time or a mood, and to sort of vicariously experience that is beautiful. If it's a thing that you don't necessarily or can't relate to, it's nice to see that different perspective. And if it is about a place or a thing that you also love or are interested in, it's cathartic, it's euphoric, it can make one feel less lonely. I never considered myself a person who was especially interested in nature of any kind until I read Kim Stanley Robinson's trilogy about colonizing and terraforming Mars, the Mars trilogy in the mid-2000s. And it took, 3 novels about hard sci-fi and speculation about like what it would be like to try to live on a hostile planet and make it more Earth-like, to cultivate an appreciation for the nature that's around me. And now I'm a trail runner, and all I want to do is go into the woods and run for hours and like just be in nature and appreciate the primacy of the planet, and to sit in that feeling of knowing that everything I love about the west coast of Canada, for example, the mountains and the forests, everything I love about that was there 10,000 years ago, and it'll still be there 10,000 years from now. And there's a kind of a loneliness and an ache to that feels good, that I really like. And I wouldn't have even known that was a feeling that I could have, much less embrace, had I not read some writing that first made me feel that way.
That's the power of art there.
Yeah.
The sincerity of it, calling back to just having mentioned that you had people who wanted to get involved in your work, the sincerity can really make art what it is.
Yeah.
I don't really know how else to put it, but that just is a really good way to show what you can do when you care about what it is you're trying to put out to other people.
Yeah.
You can always try to entertain if that's what you're sincere about, but also, it's not the whole point of it either. And sometimes I can tell there's a concern about, oh, do you think this will look good enough? If it looks good enough to you, if this is how just I want to tell people about these sort of experiences and these values, then yeah, I think you're doing it right for the most part, at least. And
I don't mean to make it sound like my interest in writing or storytelling is purely this like high-minded thing. I mean,
no.
Made of flesh and blood. I appreciate the effort that Liminal Beam puts into a 24-page Werewolf TF comic.
Yeah,
like
you see, that's why I'm not there. I don't have a space. I'm like, you werewolf people are very special, and I'm not there.
This is true.
I'm on the outskirts, so I'm like, yeah, some of it's pretty good. A lot of it really sucks, and other people are like, it is me. I live and breathe so much of it, and I'm like, I fucking don't know. I don't understand. It's cool though. Sometimes I'm out here being like, well, I wish me too. That seems really good right over there.
I mean, I'm one of those people for whom cilantro tastes like soap or gasoline, and you know what? Hats off to everybody who likes Mexican and Thai food with cilantro in it, but that's not me. Can't get into it, but I don't begrudge them their enjoyment of it.
I got the cilantro gene, so don't worry.
Yeah, I do too. We feel you. This is a safe space for cilantro.
Oh my God, I get bullied relentlessly at work for being the one non-cilantro liker.
Oh, well, you don't like cilantro? You don't like cilantro? Go fuck yourself.
If it makes you feel any better, Angela, both Libra and I are also Latino, so it's like a double whammy. So, oh man,
it's fine. I'll put pickled veggies on my banh mi and shit.
Yeah,
I don't need the cilantro. Put other green shit on. Put spinach on it. I don't know anything. Arugula.
To go back to the writing piece, I was curious if you have a way that you would describe your writing process. Like, do you have specific steps you take when you're going to work through coming up with a new piece? Do you go for a run, or how does that generally come together?
The consistent theme is panic. If I don't have an external deadline of some kind, then I'm really bad at it because I will overthink and rewrite and over-edit, and I'll rewrite the same chapter 10 times before I write a second chapter, and that's a habit that I'm trying really hard to break. Mm-hmm. I was very grateful that I had an opportunity to write They Say Don't Get Clocked under a very short deadline, because it was initially submitted to call for submissions to an anthology by Tenebris Press, I think, for an anthology they were putting out called, what is it, Your Body Is Not Your Body?
Yeah.
And it was meant to raise money for trans youth in Texas. And I think the turnaround time from announcement to submission close was 1 week. And their guidelines were essentially maximum 4,000 words, got to involve transness and horror somehow, and do not be subtle. So if you have any tropes, if you have anything that seems too corny or too on the nose for your typical writing, but you want to put it in this, this is a time to bring out the sledgehammers and the axes for whatever story you want to tell. And I had a week. I had two different concepts. I pitched both to my wife Tandy, and she said, "Go with that one." And I sat down and just jammed on it because I had that hard deadline. There was no time to second guess myself or overwork anything.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And
it's good.
I'm grateful that that the story did not get selected for that anthology, because then I had an opportunity to go back and look at the draft I had submitted and say, okay, now I'm gonna still keep myself to the 4,000 word limit here, but I have some leeway here to make some edits and some changes.
Yeah.
There needs to be more gore and more violence for the catharsis at the end, and let me cut out a few extra words to make space for that.
Nice.
And I was lucky enough to team up with two other writer friends of mine who also submitted stories to that anthology and who were also not selected. And we were able to put our 3 stories together and then sell them as a bundle called the Trans Terror Trilogy. And that was a really great experience because I got to also design the cover art for that in conjunction with Tandy, and that was a really great experience. But the actual act of writing that story was 1 week, go, and then after that I gave myself 1 month to tinker with it and still not go over the 4,000 word limit.
Yeah. I want to pick obviously more on this one because I had a chance, of course, to read it. We both had a chance to read it beforehand, and it blew me away. So to like set the scene for our audience, in They Say Don't Get Clocked, you're kind of exploring the tension inherent to the buildup of a werewolf change in the moments before sundown through the lens of a Vancouverite. So you've talked a little bit about what prompted to some degree the speed of creating the story, but I was curious to learn a little bit more about what inspired you to select the setting and the main character and the overall themes.
Yeah, I fucking read that and thought, you live in Vancouver, right?
I did for a long time. I did for the first 38 years of my life. And then in 2019, we moved here to Southern Ontario. I still love Vancouver very much. The more time I spend away from it, the more I realize that there are parts of it that I took for granted. And I chose it as a setting because I knew it really well. I know the streets. I know where the traffic jam is likely to be. I know where the hotel area district would be.
Oh, I got that impression throughout all that.
Yeah. I know the city well enough that I didn't have to think very much about where the line of action would go. And I could also fabricate enough about the city that doesn't exist, but that would ring true to people who lived there or who knew the city, that they could recognize certain references and locales.
Right.
Yep.
And the theme of I'm not going to spoil the story here, but you learn within the first paragraph that's even in the thumbnail for the itch page. There's a woman in the back of a Lyft or an Uber. She's about 15 minutes away from turning into a werewolf, and she's in a traffic jam. And she's got to get somewhere safe before she transforms, because this is not a voluntary, I'm going to change, but then I'm still me, fully me type transformation. It's dangerous. She's a time bomb, essentially.
Yeah.
And given the genesis of writing the story at all, write a cathartic horror story about the experience of being trans, I tried to imagine combining all of the most stressful experiences that I have personally had about being a visibly trans woman, just walking through a city, or just encountering other people in a large impersonal city, constantly feeling like I'm being observed, whether I am or not. And I recognize, with some distance and maturity, that people just don't typically notice other people in a city unless you are making a scene or deliberately calling attention to yourself. But to me, there has always been this feeling of, I don't want to be perceived. Or if I am perceived, I want to control how that perception happens, and I want to be able to escape it when I want. And I felt it was incredibly stressful in a cathartic way to write about, to put a character into a situation that is essentially a synthesis of every bad feeling experience I've had in a ride share or on the SkyTrain or walking to the office or being in a coffee shop.
I gotta say, that metaphorical parallel really stood out to me between the unnamed characters lycanthropy and the transness. It's very much a crucial part of the story, and obviously werewolves have always been closely connected to the identities of marginalized folks and used to explore those narratives, but it's very clear this is coming from a place where you're drawing on your experiences, and that definitely influenced the allegory in the piece, which I thought was quite wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for both of your kind words about it.
Yeah, I just really enjoyed the fact that when I was reading it, I didn't feel like I was being weighed down by descriptors of emotions and environments. It very easily got the discomfort and put me right into it. I'm like, man, this fucking sucks. is the feeling is that this fucking sucks, and this whole thing sucks, and it's just gonna get worse. And it's great for mounting tension. And there were times where I'm like, wait, how much time is left? And then and then a little bit later, you're just like, here's an update on how much time is left. And it was really good to me to do that. And I'm just like, come on.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'm sorry.
No. I read Berserk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Granted.
But yeah, it was so fucking good. Yeah,
Yeah.
time for me to gush a little bit because I have a really hard stances on writing because a lot of people in transformation fandom, plenty of people with the I can't draw so I'll write, and writing is not just a thing you can do in substitution for not being able to draw, and it is fucking hard to do it well,
very hard.
and they don't get it, and there's a lot of stuff that people do that I really can't fucking stand. And Zil's just sends me the story, and I'm like, let me see. And I'm just like, fuck. And I'm reading this, and I'm gushing to him next to me, and we're like, yeah, and this, and did you notice that? And it's just like, fuck. Thank you.
Yeah.
My gosh.
There was a part towards the beginning where the character is like almost like imagining some of her changes, even though they're not necessarily happening. And like the visceralness of like the imagery just like completely sent me. Like I was like, this is so good. And as Libra mentioned, like I think the timing thing was just so interesting because like the central story of the central tension of the story is not, is she going to transform? It's when. And that is something that you don't see very often in like, you know, a broad story. Like obviously there's always like the, oh no, full moon, blah, blah, blah. But this is like, you're starting from ground zero and the tension is, I have a ticking time bomb. And you know, I don't know, you know, what the impact is going to be on other people, because that's the concern. Like she talks a lot about like, you know, who's going to be around her and those kinds of things. Is it going to be the Lyft driver or wherever she's going and somewhere in between? And so what I was really curious to know was like, well, how did you settle on making that the unique source of tension? Because again, it was just struck me as something that I hadn't read before.
I like the idea of machines, you know, of something starting with a set course of action and all the mechanisms are there and you just hit play and watch as things kind of unfold and the machine's going to do whatever it's going to do. So sort of setting things up Rube Goldberg style, or, you know, through some sort of system where you've got initial conditions and you're just going to hit go and watch how things play out. Just putting her in that car, in that situation, saying, all right, you have 15 minutes. You need to get to somewhere safe to change. And you can't just like lock yourself in like a public bathroom or something. Like this is bad. And you're far away from that safety. What are you going to do? Like, how are you going to engage with the mechanisms of everyday life in a major city, being far from any kind of aid, to reach your goal, to reach a safe place? And I knew where she was going to end up in the story. That was part of the initial pitch, but her journey along the way really came out of some advice on writing that I got from another podcaster, actually, Tom Harrison, who's got a podcast called Anime Sickos. And he was talking about his writing process, and he described writing as putting a character in the situation where the coolest shit possible can happen. Like just get him in a predicament and try to figure out what is the craziest, most interesting, like wildest thing that could happen in this situation, and then just write that, and then just leapfrog from one situation to the next. And in the case of this character, I mean, she's in a car that needs to get somewhere, so you can't have her necessarily roaming around a whole lot, but she's still mentally trying to sleuth things out and pay attention to how much time is left and like what are her options, and her options are dwindling rapidly as time goes on. So these fantastical things that she thinks, I could do this or I could do that, those are starting to drop off the board. You know, she's running out of things that she could do until you know, she's only got one or two options left, and they're both terrible, and she has to choose one of them.
Yeah, I love that about it.
Yeah. I know we don't want to like spoil the ending here. I will just say that one of the strongest themes in the piece isn't evident, I think, until the end. And I was curious as to like, was there an element of wish fulfillment or something else kind of playing into how you approach the ending?
Yes. I'm not going to dress that up. Yes, there was a definite element of wish fulfillment in that ending. It felt, when I said, I needed to make some space to include more description,
it was there.
The ending was the area that needed the additional description. I think, especially given, again, the context for which the story was written, pursuing any kind of art that has an end goal of simply like blowing off steam or expressing an idea that may not be easy to express or comfortable for other people to hear or read can be incredibly rewarding and healthy, as long as you're doing it in a way that people can choose whether or not to engage with it. You know, there are some content warnings, both on the page where you can buy the book and within the book itself.
Right.
And once you get over that hurdle, it's just glorious to be able to say, like, here's a situation that I think about a lot because of who and what I am, and now I get to write about it.
That resonates with me, and I will say I was delighted. I wish I could have like had a picture of the sheer delight that crossed my face when I got to the final page. So that was wonderful. I had some quick fun questions I wanted to ask as well.
Yeah.
So first off, is traffic really that bad in Vancouver? And are there any specific experience that inspired the absolutely maddening truck blockage that our main character has to deal with?
Traffic is bad in Vancouver, but it's not as bad as that generally, unless there's a hockey game happening. And I moved away at around the time when the local hockey team was really in the toilet, so I don't think there were that many people interested in going out to see the games anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's been stuck in traffic. When I was in Vancouver and going to work, I would generally take public transit, and there were a few times where I'd be stuck on a bus and like really had to get somewhere for whatever reason. So, you know, some of those come from personal experiences, but it's not that bad. If you're thinking of taking an Uber or taking the bus through Vancouver because you're visiting, don't worry about it. It's totally fine.
Okay.
I would like to think that the situation is because you wanted to make one of the worst possible situations for that story.
Yeah.
Oh, fully.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If I had to actually think, oh no, it's like this all the time, then whatever. Anyway, The point is good.
Yeah, it's good. It reminded me of Toronto traffic, if I can say that. But
I've heard a really bad thing. I have not actually yet been to Toronto proper, despite having lived here since September 2019. But I hear really bad things about the traffic. It's not great here in London.
Drivers are fucking terrible.
Yeah, they're really bad here. But everyone says I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I will say that Toronto drivers are the worst drivers ever, and someone will fight me on it if that's fine. The other little fun question I wanted to ask actually was about how good the sandwiches are from Zeldman's. Like, that must have been like inspired by something, and I just wanted to know like what the place was that inspired that, because they sounded like good sandwiches. So
yeah, Zeldman's is a composite of three different things. There is no Zeldman's in Vancouver.
Damn.
Its physical location in the story is exactly where a really great Szechuan restaurant called Peaceful Restaurant is. I'm very much looking forward to eating there in 3 weeks when I go back to Vancouver. So that's the physical location, Peaceful Restaurant, super good. The idea of like a deli that serves great sandwiches, that's Solly's. There's 2 or 3 Solly's delis in Vancouver, amazing Jewish delis. And Zeldman, I needed a Jewish name that wasn't Solly's, and Jeffrey Zeldman is kind of the forefather of accessible modern web design, and that's what I do for a living. So I just, I've read Jeffrey Zeldman and a list apart in his work for 15, 20 years now, and so his name has always appealed to me. So yeah, it's just a composite.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
Good sandwiches at Solly's for sure, but I also recommend the matzo ball soup.
amazing.
Never had it, so I'd try it if I get a chance.
Oh yeah, I love hearing about recommendations for restaurants in other cities, honestly. So I will note both of those down for whenever it is that I'm next in the area.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, there's a character mentioned towards the beginning of Sharon. I was curious if there were any direct parallels to her, or if she's like a collection of all the worst sorts of bigots smushed into one.
I thought about how to answer this. I'll say it straight up. She is a gender-swapped version of a real person. This guy's name is Barry Neufeld, and he was on the school board in Chilliwack, which is the city where I was born. It's about an hour east of Vancouver.
Oh yeah.
And he's an asshole and a terrible person and a transphobe and an anti-vaxxer and all sorts of other horrible things. And I chose him I chose a version of him, a version of him that had been tweaked just enough that he wouldn't necessarily want to get litigious about it.
Yeah.
To represent that type of character in the story.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I looked through his Wikipedia page and I saw that he's no longer trustee or anything. So we do love that.
Yeah.
I hope it never fucking comes back then.
Yeah, agreed.
No, I think he's done so.
Yeah. I guess then my last kind of question I want to ask before we move to the last topic, I wanted to know, what do you hope is the main takeaway for readers from your story?
You're not alone. It doesn't matter how isolated you feel by who or what you are, or what you wish you were, or what you're trying to become. It doesn't matter how strange it seems to you. You're not alone. And that doesn't mean that all the company you find is necessarily good or healthy for you. But if you're true to what's important to you and you're honest with yourself about who and what you are, you'll find other people who will support you and take care of you. And you could be there to support them and take care of them.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's nothing quite as isolating as truly believing that there's nobody else that could possibly understand. And that's almost never true.
Yeah.
I have really enjoyed the ability you have to express and make people care. Just give another thing about Don't Get Clocked is, I don't know, I like that you seem to understand that people have many dimensions to them, because there is one part when you go to another scene, the driver says something. It's the last thing the driver gets to say. And when I read that part, I was like, that is going to stick with me for a very long time. Yeah. That was so good. That is I think that was the moment that made me think, I would love for this to be a short film.
Wow. Yeah. That would be incredible. Thank you. The driver saying what they say, that is one of the purest times I've ever had writing, where the character told me, I'm going to say this. I typed the line down, but it was the character who, until that point, was definitely did not have many dimensions to them, suddenly became something else. So that surprised me when that showed up in the story, and I'm glad to hear that it had an impact.
Yeah. Oh my God. It did. I think it's one of the most defining things, because it's so hard. It's so hard to not talk about it. I'd love to just have a dedicated conversation about the story in full, because that shit really hit me deep. Yeah. And I also just think of the whole "you are not alone" thing, and people can be there for you if you're being yourself. And that's something like, holy shit. I love it. It
resonates so hard. I think it's something that we all crave to hear in some ways from, the people around us or the media that we consume, that we're not alone. And I think that you can hear that in so many different ways, but there are specific ways it can be said that can resonate all the more deeply. And I felt that the way that it was kind of approached and presented in this story was one of those ways. So I really, really appreciated it.
Wow. Well, thank you.
Truly fucking wonderful. Yeah.
Can you tell we like the story? Can you tell we like the story?
Buy it. Read it.
Yeah.
Don't be a Philistine.
Yeah. Please go check it out. Highly, highly recommend on itch.io. We'll have time to plug it at the end. I do want to make sure, I know we've been chatting for quite a long time. I do want to make sure we have time for the last topic. And so I did want to talk a little bit about embracing pain and discomfort in order to change. And I know that obviously you've talked a little bit, being a runner. And so obviously there's a certain amount of pain that comes with that.
Yes.
And, have you always embraced pain and discomfort and transformation, or was there something that just made it click for you one day?
Something made it click. And it's fairly recent, I think, that the desire to transform and the pain and discomfort that comes from running sort of meshed. Since realizing that I was trans and trying everything that I could to feel comfortable in my body before starting hormone replacement therapy, I developed a better relationship with my body, but it was purely physical. Like to the extent of like, being in the shower after running around Stanley Park in Vancouver for the first time, which is like an 8-mile run, and like literally looking down and thanking my body for, helping me do that.
Yeah.
But it didn't really impact me mentally other than, just the raw endorphins. And then my coach said something to me 2 years ago where I was in the middle of a long run, like a 4 or 5 hour run, and I was struggling. And I texted her for help, basically, to just cry on her shoulder and be like, hey, this sucks. Like, I feel like I'm a fraud. Like, why am I training for this crazy race if I can't even do this? Because, I'm in pain. And her response in so many words is, well, it's supposed to hurt. Nobody runs this. Doesn't matter whether you're an elite athlete or what. Like, if you run or if you do this with your body, it doesn't matter how well trained you are, it's going to hurt. That's part of the process. And that really stuck with me because it gave me a new way to look at everything that I've done physically and mentally to aid in my transition, to work on my mental health, understanding that I'm autistic, developing better relationships with the people in my family. None of it's easy. All of it hurts, but the effort is part of what makes the successes all the more glorious or enjoyable. And that helped me feel better about the fact that running for a really long time does hurt and it sucks. But nothing in the world feels like crossing the finish line after you've been out there for 10 hours and realizing that you ran 60K or whatever. And thinking that way about stuff like running and mental health and, electrolysis to remove unwanted facial hair and stuff like that also lends itself quite handily to thinking about, probably pretty painfully turning into a werewolf over the course of like 5 to 10 minutes or however long you want the TF to last. There's lots of different ways to think about what that might feel like. Whether it's like the numbness of your limb falling asleep, or having a vague sense that there's something happening, to like full on, like every nerve is on fire and you can feel every bone break and shift. And, I'm interested in that whole spectrum of sensation as a possible thing to endure, because that's the price you pay if you want to, run a marathon, or if you want to become more your human self by changing aspects of your body to match your gender presentation. And that's something that you have to endure if you want to turn into a werewolf. It's just, it's probably not going to feel very good, but it's not supposed to.
Yeah, I like to say to people, because I don't remember where I picked this up, it was something like, there is no meaningful change without pain. Mm-hmm. And I just think about that a lot. Just like you, every major thing I ever done had some degree of discomfort, some more than others, but like, oh man, this is going to suck. Like, yeah, it's going to, it's what's on the other side that you're really going for. It's gonna be worth it. And the pain will also go away, Yeah. The scary thing about pain is that you think it will last forever, but, a lot of it doesn't, and some of it actually doesn't last quite as long as you fear.
Yeah.
And that's why,
it's a different kind of pain with running as well, because there is a type of pain that is glamorous or sexy, in some cases literally sexy, that people can seek out, and I'm certainly not a stranger to that. But that is, to my mind, something that is sought after and generally experienced in a very carefully staged and kind of like glamorous context. And there's a lot of werewolf transformation stuff that is in that as well, because it's a very heightened kind of experience that is temporary, and there's a defined reason for if you're talking about werewolf transformation and somebody's hand changes and you see like the bones breaking and shifting and their nails growing out, their claws growing out from under their human nails, there's pain associated with that, but you can see what's causing the pain, and you recognize when the change has stopped, so the pain is likely to stop. But I think there is also an element of pain to things like transformation that isn't as glamorous or as cut and dry. And that's the sort of pain that I experience if I'm in the middle of a long run and everything kind of hurts and things are chafing and I'm tired and my feet hurt, but I know I have
That's the suffering.
10 miles to go. It's the suffering.
That's an element. You can have pain without suffering, and you can have just suffering.
Yes.
And pain and suffering can include pain of many kinds. But yeah, that's kind of what you're getting at, right?
That is. I appreciate you framing it that way. I'd never thought of it, as those two distinct things before. But yeah, there is a lot of intentional suffering that is not a thing that I would seek out on its own for its own sake, but is a price worth paying for an end goal, whether it's finishing a race or becoming a hulking fur-covered murder machine.
Yeah, something like that. Man, I think it was... To live is to suffer, to survive is to find meaning in the suffering. And that's kind of the framing that I think of. You can just experience the worst things. And if you're not finding a point to it, then that's all it ever was.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's cool that, yeah, sure, maybe you didn't frame it that way in those words, but I do appreciate that you find the distinction between those things, because I think that, you know how I think earlier we were talking about what sort of feeling or impression people wanted to get across with the depiction of a transformation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And, in all its audiovisual glory and things like that. And it's like, what are your takeaways from it? Well, anybody can make it suck. But that's not very interesting, is it?
No.
You could arguably get the same kind of experience watching Saw.
Yes.
What's the point?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to take it back to Clocked for a second, I mean, that character is suffering. She has found herself in an uncomfortable situation that is not necessarily directly attached to or related to her being a werewolf. It's an environmental suffering that she's wound up in, and she is enduring it for a purpose. It's not the pain of changing; it is the suffering of changing or being herself in that particular environment that she decides is worth it.
It's really layered.
Mm-hmm.
It's very layered. It goes straight from, because the human life for the character is also not easy.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
And it's just compounded by the known condition and what has to be done about it. And another thing that I appreciate about it, because, here's more about suffering and pain, is the idea that no matter like the bitterness that's in her words and her expressions or perceptions about the people and the world around her, she cares. She cares enough to not let terrible things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that is fucking cool.
Yeah.
I love that shit.
And it resonates so much. Sorry, just to build on that, it resonates so much in terms of, I think, how well she's characterized in the story, because this is obviously, as we've said before, the trans themes are very evident there. And as we said before with the horror community, if you know what suffering is, you know what horror is, and you can have an appreciation for it. And it also leads to a lot of empathy. And it's clear that, from her experiences, she has gone through a lot, enough to, have that deep empathy for people, and also not have turned, her anger back out onto, society writ large. She has her own goals, and she has her things that drive the story forwards, but she has that caring, like Libra said, for those who are, just out for a walk or, whatever. Yeah. And I think that's important.
To tie that back to running, one of the things that I really cherish about, especially trail running and ultra running, and just to get out there.
Yeah.
An ultra marathon is any running race that is longer than a standard marathon. A standard marathon is 26.2 miles or 42K. An ultra is typically 50K, 100K, 176K or 100 miles. Yes, it's ludicrous. But because it is such it's a literal endurance trial. If you are out there with other people, which you are, because believe it or not, other people do sign up for these crazy races, there is a joy that comes from surviving suffering together, you know, to see somebody else who's struggling because they didn't bring enough food or because they don't have enough hydration before the next aid station, or they wore the wrong socks and now they have blisters and they didn't think to, you know, bring any bandages, and to be able to like help them with supplies that you have with you, or just to suffer alongside them and offer encouragement and support until they can get to the next aid station and take care of themselves.
Yeah.
I almost enjoy that more than the actual like finish, because you are in your own little bubble for a little while with other people who are having a very unique experience that involves suffering and pain and great exertion and effort. And you can support them in a way that nobody else can, because you're there with them. You know, you're not alone out there.
Yeah. It's a wonderful experience. That's actual like peer-to-peer sort of teaching in a way too.
Yeah.
That's how it was when I was training for wrestling in Gleason's. We had the guy who was the veteran, who was the head of the entire thing, but mostly it was anybody who knew better than us would be mostly teaching you that day. Mm-hmm. And I thought that structure was very interesting and also kept things very grounded, because everybody's still learning, everybody's still trying. So that way you understand that you're going to get to this one's level at some point if you continue.
Yeah.
And that's a great feeling, because goals can also be completely, you know, can just seem completely impossible.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say sometimes the goal is just lady turn into big monster. Like that's
totally fine.
That's a great goal.
Again, sincerity. What the fuck?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, when you're running, is that sometimes what gets you forward? You're like, oh, you know, if I just make this next kilometer, like that's when the TF's gonna kick in. Okay, that's good. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, I will literally tell. I mean, just last Saturday, I ran a marathon in the heat and humidity, and multiple times I told myself, if you can't endure this, how are you going to endure turning into a werewolf? Like, just come on.
Yeah.
You know, you can rationalize your way through a lot of things that way.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. And speaking of rationalizing things, because I think about it when I lift weights, I'm just like, maybe that's kind of how it feels to like change or something. So like when you're running, do you like to, or do you think like, this is the kind of thing that I imagine I would feel if I were changing?
Yes, I do. I will say that there are some experiences that I have primarily while running that feel very much like, oh, I've already transformed. I become completely disconnected from my form as a human. I'm no longer thinking about what I look like physically, and I'm purely in the moment. I'm purely feeling what my body is doing. Yep. And I'm totally freed from, you know, the human mask, basically. And so anything I'm feeling in those moments, which are fleeting, and I, you know, of course I like them, but it's one of those things that the more you seek it out, the more elusive it becomes. But when they happen, it's euphoric. It's the most incredible thing in the world. So there are times for sure when I'm running or lifting weights, more with running though, that, it's very closely tied to both the feeling of transforming and then the feeling of having transformed and being something else.
Oh, it's literally a transformative experience.
Yes.
There was another piece of advice that people talked about trying to run. It's like if you want to get into running, there's going to be this point. Please correct me if I'm wrong. There's supposed to be a point where it hurts so much to keep going. Your lungs like really, really hurt. And it feels like that's when you should stop. But if you go beyond that, that goes away, and then everything else feels way better.
There is a kind of a wall that you can hit, especially when you are first getting into. And I'm a total amateur at this. I know what works for me. I'm not a coach. When I started getting into longer distances, there was for sure a threshold where I would start to feel like, oh, I'm having trouble breathing. I've hit the wall of what my body is capable of doing.
Yeah.
But according to my coach or to the training plan that I'm following, or you know whatever professional advice I was getting, I should be able to push myself further than this. So I'll just try for that extra mile or for that extra 20 minutes and just see what happens. And every single time I've gotten over that and I've made it the extra distance and felt a million times better than I ever thought I would.
Yeah, there's a process of getting to know your body, and that's part of the transformative experience where you're like, I didn't know I was capable of that.
Yes. Yeah.
And now you are a little different from where you started.
Yes.
And that does feel great. So yeah, thank you for confirming that, because it's the kind of thing that I think about where I'm just like, there's some tearing, there's some hurting. Every time I do this, a little different, and I think that's really cool. And I think it also helps to put anything that I'm feeling into what I'm working on.
Yes,
and got to be able to do that sometime.
And to your point, it is a transformative experience, and this ties into something that I really like about werewolves in particular. You are being changed subtly, but almost permanently, in a way that is almost like a secret. Because if you're not in the gym, if you're not in the ring practicing wrestling moves, or if you're not out on the trail running, if you're just walking around in street clothes, other than maybe something about the way that you're built, there's no way for anybody to know that you're actually capable of those feats of strength, or of running a marathon, or running 50 miles or whatever.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
I like that.
Yeah, that's something I really like about werewolves, is the fact that they turn into these creatures, but for a lot of the time, certain details notwithstanding, they just look like humans. But there's this secret thing that they have in them that is either a curse, or it's a thing that they love and they nurture and protect. There's all sorts of different things you could do with it, but it's a thing that is not plainly visible to the outside world, but that they know about themselves.
Yeah, that also breeds confidence, which I think a lot of us also keep searching for, trying to better be self-assured, actually, feel secure, not insecure. And if you could hold on to things like that, it's always good to be able to walk around and say, like, I got this in me. Nobody knows that, but I know that. That's really good. That helps a lot.
Yeah.
So we did get some questions from the audience, so we'll just run through them. The first one is from Figer Fire, and Figer Fire says, TF is obviously important to many as an interest, art, or expression. So I'm just wondering, does it play into your spirituality or religious side of things?
That's a great question. I would say that yes, it does. It's difficult to unpack the ways that is true, even if we had another 2 hours to talk about it. I will say that I have pursued certain Therian approaches, which I've decided aren't a good fit for me. And I'm currently, I would say, a very bad Buddhist. And there's a lot of not being attached to any given outcome, but still kind of pursuing certain outcomes that feels very aligned with, like, I want to transform. I want to become this different thing. I want to become a werewolf, but I don't want to hold myself to the idealized outcome of what that looks like. You know what? If I turned into a werewolf this next full moon on August 1st, I won't be mad if I have a tail or if I'm not like I am not necessarily attached to that particular outcome as much as I would prefer it. So yes, it does have an impact on how I think about spiritual things, but I don't have a concise thesis for that yet. Maybe in an upcoming story.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Right. What about you, Zil?
I mean, so I've alluded to this before, but I was raised Catholic. Where I stand on that spectrum is a big question mark. But the thing I like to mention about that is that transformation is literally canonical within the religion. And I think that's fucking great. So if anyone ever questions me about it, I'm like, well, according to one of the biggest religions in the world, TF happens all the time. So bada bing. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm good here.
It's a ubiquitous theme.
Checkmate, idiot.
Yeah, checkmate, idiot. So, yeah, I did, to be clear, I'm not very religious, but I think that's funny. So
yeah.
All right. I'm not a very religious or spiritual person. I do feel like it has played a lot into my perception of people and living and and the dimensions of, like, just change in general. It's easy for people to just kind of dismiss everything else that could happen to you as like that's not TF, but I don't know. I'm also not married to like this specific idea of what it's supposed to be, and I like finding it in other ways. So if it means, yes, anything from like changing your body in a literal way, which you can do, and you're like, holy shit, that still counts. You know, if trust me, if you were to like gain a certain amount of weight or lose it, or gain a certain amount of muscle or lose it, you're changed, and it changes a lot of things about how you live your life and how you feel about yourself. Yeah. So it's very real. And despite not being necessarily religious or spiritual, yes, I do carry. It does affect me day to day and in my perceptions and thinking, you know, and looking at other people and thinking, wow, they were this and now they're this, and I was like this and now I'm different, and who knows what I'm going to be a few years from now, a few months from now. It's there.
Yeah.
Awesome. The second question I have here is from Professor Scritch, and he asks, if you found yourself turning into an animal with time enough to only send one text, who do you text and what's the message?
I just talked to my wife about this the other night. The answer is I would text my wife, Tandy Rowe, and I would just text in all caps, finally. And she would know what that means. She said, I know what that would mean, that you would just be gone for a couple of weeks, but that you would come home.
Oh, that's great. That's really nice.
Yeah.
How about you, Libra?
A message. Oh, I would be texting Katana, and I would be just... Let me see, what would the message be? I think something akin to... I'm actually changing into something... I'm going to turn on my here's my location, something like that. Nothing very fun, because I don't expect to be the one to ever be in that position. But so that it's like very, very utilitarian. Like, find me, this is my last location, help.
Yeah.
I like that. I like the realistic approach. You gotta share your coordinates and worry about the logistics.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I got my phone, I'm going to be doing that. Like, now, please help.
Yeah. Oh man. I think because of context and other things, I would probably be texting either Libra or Katana as well, actually. But I would alternate based on the timing. So if it was during the day, I would probably text Katana. If it was during the evening, I'd probably text Libra, because I would know they'd be the more likely to answer the text.
Yeah.
I think the text would also depend on like what transformation I was undergoing, but I think, like, broadly speaking, since this was an animal, we'll stick with just that parameter. I would probably do the live location on Telegram for like 8 hours, and I would just be like, help, and that would be it, because I'm imagining there would be a lot of time, so it would just be a help, but like with a smiley face, like, you know, like help, but like
I was gonna say, I'm like, if you ever do that, it's like feverish searching time, bring a weapon, you know.
Yeah, but the little smiley face. The smiley face.
Money, weapon, keys.
Yeah.
Now, you said that if you were turning into something that was sort of animal based, I want you to know that if you do undergo the toaster TF, you can text me.
Okay, thank you. I will do that then. I love that, and I'm so glad you remembered that. Yes. Toaster TF is great. Any sort of appliance, I will text you. So, oh my goodness. And then the last question we have here is from Liko, and Liko asks, "What is your favorite kind of TF destroys clothing situation or trope?" So, for example, like a shoe burst, a tail splosion, a shirt ripping, that kind of a thing.
It's a tie between shoe burst and expansion of the torso, with the spine and shoulders ripping a shirt.
Oh, that's good.
That was my answer.
Well, then you both have good taste.
Yeah, I mean, answering two is kind of a cop out, I think. So if you really had me choose one, it would be the shoe burst. Before we took down all our art off the walls to stage this house to sell, there was a triptych hanging above my monitor here of art that my wife did like a decade ago. That's a transformation sequence of a high-heeled shoe and like werewolf toes bursting out of it. So that's, you know, if I've got art of it on my wall, then that probably counts as my favorite.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so. I was gonna say two, and then I was like, no, I do have to pick one. That's a cop out. So I will go with the tail explosion. I love my tails. I own 9 furry tails of various species, so I love them that much. It has to be the tail explosion. I cannot give another answer. So yeah.
Respect.
All right then.
How about you, Libra?
Oh, like I said, I want to see like seriously, I want to see like the spine and the back muscles like tear out the back of clothing. I love that. Yeah. That's really appealing to me.
It's a very good choice.
It speaks of great pleasure to me, ironically.
Yeah,
because like you're hunched over, like yeah.
If you removed the clothing requirement, I would say my favorite part to see transform would be hands, because our hands are the parts of ourselves that we're most intimately used to seeing all the time, and they have the most unique character to us. So to see them transform utterly or into something that is like, again, this is a thing I love about werewolves, is that they're a mixture of human and monster or wolf. There is some element of what you once were in your transformed state. And I find that really appealing, to be able to still see a ring on your finger, or to still have the same pattern of, the skin on your knuckles, only, your knuckles are bigger, but you can still tell, oh, that's mine, because it's still my hand, even though the skin color is different and there's fur and claws, I still have that little scar there or something.
Yeah, and I agree with that also, because it's like hands are the way that we experience most of the world.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think if I had to pick, I would pick the muzzle, but specifically because you would be able to see it in your like vision, and that I've had that experience in VR and it delights me to no end. So I would really want to experience that. So
I need to get into VR. I have so many friends that are into it, and it's just looming in my future when I have the space in my life to get a PC that can actually run stuff properly. I can't wait.
It changed my life.
Do I have somebody who can help you get into VR?
We do have an expert that lives with Libra by the name of Katana, who is an expert on that. And shout out to her, and also Cass, casually noted, who helped me get my headset. I would be remiss not to mention him. We are definitely at time, but I have absolutely loved this conversation. Angela, I was curious, if anyone is looking to find you, where can they find you online?
That's increasingly difficult with the implosion of Twitter. I would say the two best locations are my website, argylewerewolf.com, because that has links to just about everywhere else and everything else I do. If you're on Twitter, it's Quinton, Aquinton. If you're on Blue Sky, it's at werewolf.pizza. And
sweet.
Those are those are the three main places I would say, especially if you just go to argylewerewolf.com, you'll see links to everywhere that I'm at, and my writing and Werewolves Versus and all those other things.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on here.
Thank you for having me
too, because you've obviously done a lot of work and you've attracted a lot of creative people, and I have no doubt, after everything that you talked about here, that the stuff you've done has actually touched a lot of people in meaningful ways. Mm-hmm. And so, one could only hope to leave a kind of mark on people or the world in any sort of way. And I think you've done that, and it's really cool to be able to speak to somebody like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I concur with everything Libra said, and I think that the body of your work and the like expansiveness of it is just a testament to someone who's done a lot of like deep thinking and has a lot of good thoughts and things to share. And I'm just glad that you choose to share them with us, because it's the community is enriched for it. So
fuck yeah.
There's always a story in every Werewolves Versus that makes me cry, and I guess this is the first podcast recording I've been on that made me cry. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I'm grateful that I get an opportunity to just share the things that I like, and if it can enrich anybody's world in any way, then I feel like I'm being useful, and that's all I really want.
You're doing it. Usefulness or not, you're making people happier. That's good.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again, Angela, and thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this week's episode of the TFTuesday podcast. As always, if you'd like to support us, you can go to patreon.com/TFTuesdayPod. I don't have much else to say, actually. I don't have a little witty clip at the end, because I'm just so happy with how this one went. And I just hope everyone's like getting some good rest, staying healthy, drinking water, keeping an open mind, being TFE, all the usual stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Take care. And we'll have another episode for you next week.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.